Hello everyone, my name is Chintan and today we'll be talking about how to crack the Symbiosis entrance test, the SET. The SET is the flagship exam to get admission into any of the Symbiosis University colleges, be it the SCMC, be it the SCMS or SCIT. Any other colleges that you want to get into, SET is the exam that you have to give. Now, we'll break down the entire video into 4 simple parts. The 4 P's of the video. The first will be the process, the second will be the paper pattern, the third will be the past year's trend or the past paper analysis, and the fourth one will be our preparation. Starting with the process. The SET is a simple exam which is for 1 hour and has 60 questions. So 60 questions in 60 minutes, kind of a T20 format. Now, the process for the entire admission is that you have to give your SET and then you get a shortlist for your VAT PI. In some cases, it could be a VAT PI followed with a portfolio. Now, the split originally used to be a 50-50 split. This year, according to the SET bulletin, they've changed that split. It has now become a simple 70-30. So, although your SET score is out of 60, that will get bumped up to 70. At the same time, although the interview is for 50 marks, it only holds a weightage of 30%. Therefore, your SET scores become all the more important. Now, talking further about the process, if you are trying to get into SCMC, which is for mass media and communication, in that case, your split is going to be 50, 30, 10 and 10, which is 50 for your SET scores, 30 for your interview, 10 for the VAT and 10 for your portfolio. These details are available on their website as well. Now, let's look at the important dates that you have to keep in mind while applying for the SET. Your application deadlines are 12th of April. So make sure that you fill the forms within 12th of April. Now coming to the exam, you have 2 attempts and the best out of these 2 attempts is what is going to be considered as your final SET score. The 2 attempts this year are on the 5th of May and the 11th of May. You can choose to either attempt any one of the 2 slots or you can attempt both the slots. In the scenario that you're attempting both the slots, the best out of the 2 slots is what is going to be considered. Now, let's talk about the admit cards. So, your admit cards for the first slot, which is on the 5th of May, will get released by the 25th of April. Whereas, the admit cards for your second slot, which is 11th of May, will be released by the 30th of April. The results are tentatively declared to be announced by 22nd of May. Post which you will get your shortlist for the interviews and the further rounds. That is all about the process. I hope you have enough clarity about the entire process for now. Now, let's jump to the next P, which is our paper pattern. SET is a 60 question exam to be solved in 60 minutes. Now, this seems far-fetched, but we have 4 different sections that are included here. The first is General English. General English forms for 16 questions out of the 60. The second is Quantitative. Quantitative also forms for 16 questions out of the total 60. The third is General Awareness. Now, SET is one of the exams which gives high weightage to your GK and your General Awareness. Again, General Awareness also has 16 questions and the remaining 12 questions come from Analytical and Logical Reasoning. So, the split is simple. General English 16, Quantitative 16, General Awareness 16 and your Logical and Analytical Reasoning has 12 questions. That is 60 questions. The marking scheme for the exam is you get +1 for a correct question and there is no negative for a wrong answer. Which means that you should be attempting all 60 questions. Leaving any question isn't an option because there is no negative. And therefore, your strategy for the paper primarily has to be that I have to make sure that I'm attempting all 60. We'll discuss the strategy at length in some time. Now, another key feature that we need to keep in mind is, although we have 16 questions in the quantitative section, there's no calculator to help us out. That being said, the quantitative section is fairly easy as well. Which brings us to the next P, which is the past trends and the past paper analysis. So, if we look at SET 2023, the paper pattern was the same. You had 16 in General English, 16 in Quantitative, 16 in General Awareness, and you had 12 questions in Analytical and Logical Reasoning. If we talk about the paper trend that we had, so last year in General English, out of the 16 questions, the major chunk of the questions came from vocabulary and grammar, which cumulatively made for almost 12 out of the 16 questions that we have. A list of all the questions with all the topics is on your screen. Coming to your quantitative section, primarily the quantitative section included arithmetic and modern math, which again made up for almost 10 to 11 questions out of 16, the other questions coming from numbers and algebra. Again, a detailed list is on the screen. Next was GK, which is general awareness. General awareness 16 questions are said to be split as a 6 to 9, 6 to 9 out of static GK and current affairs. But for the last year, this split was 11 questions from static GK and 5 questions from dynamic GK as in the current affairs. And finally, the 12 questions under analytical and logical reasoning were made up of primarily verbal reasoning, which includes your critical reasoning, which includes your cause and effect, which includes your statement, assumption, conclusion, and so on. The other questions come out from series coding and decoding, arrangements, and those topics. Again, a detailed list is visible on the screen. Let's talk about the scores and what should be the ideal time split that you should be looking at. Because in SET, since you only have 60 minutes, your time split becomes important. If we talk about general English, out of the 16 questions that you have, you can easily score anywhere around 12 questions. But the difficulty is easy to moderate. And therefore, out of the 15, when you're targeting 12 marks, you should also be targeting around 12 minutes that you should be giving. See, this section is fairly easy to score because it's grammar and vocabulary. So either you know or you do not know. And therefore, your target should be 12 or more than 12 marks in 12 minutes. The next section is quantitative. Remember, I told you there's no calculator, but trust me, you don't need a calculator for this. The questions are straightforward, the calculations are easy. But an important part of the entire quantitative section is your ability to choose the options wisely. See, the questions are not going to trick you as much as the language of the questions. And therefore, when you're about to mark the question, mark the answer, it is important that you make sure to see the options carefully, read the question carefully, and just select the right one. Now, an ideal time split that you should be looking at in terms of quant is around 20 to 25 minutes. I know we are at a crunch of time, but if you manage to give 20 to 25 minutes and get in return around 13 marks, that is what was the ideal score range that the toppers had secured in the last year's SET. Coming to GK. Now, general awareness is a section which is fairly tricky and the difficulty is also moderate to difficult. The main reason being, it's like an ocean. There's no syllabus. There's no set syllabus. The problem is they can ask you questions from anything. Current affairs last year was only 5, but it could have also gone on till 9. And therefore, it just becomes all the more difficult. Now, if we talk about what was the split, it was 11 questions from static, 5 from current affairs. But a good score was anywhere around 10 to 11 marks. Now, I know that the purchase is very less, but then that is why you're also giving very less time. So the time that you're going to be allocating to general awareness is only 8 to 9 minutes. See, the simple funda behind this is either you know the answer or you do not know the answer. It's not like if you just keep on hovering over the question for 2 minutes, you're going to get the answer. And therefore, you should be very prompt with your attempts. Now, after this, we come to the last section, which is logical and analytical reasoning. Now here, verbal reasoning forms a very important part where you had almost 5 or 6 questions out of 12 and the others are series coding and decoding. Here, a good split last year was 9 out of 12, but you will have to give almost 12 to 13 minutes or even 15 minutes for that matter, keeping yourself a 2 to 3 minute buffer towards the end, just so that if you've left with any question, if you've left any question unattempted, you can always go back and attempt those questions. Now, this is what should be your ideal split, and this is exactly what paves way for your actual strategy for the preparation. And that brings us to the last P, which is preparation. We've already seen the split of topics in each and every section, and therefore our preparation primarily should revolve around those topics. But you know what? More than the content, I would suggest that your preparation should include more of time management. See, 60 minutes is a very less time if you sit for an exam. It is a lot when you're just sitting idle. But in an exam, it's very less. And therefore, your practice should mainly involve your time management skills. And therefore, whenever you're preparing, whenever you're practicing, make sure that you practice in a timed-based environment. Sit with a timer and solve the questions. You could start easy. Maybe let's say solving 50 questions in 1 hour. But then eventually you should go on increasing the intensity to the point that you're solving 60 questions in 50 minutes, because the exam pressure will make sure that you make mistakes in 10. And therefore, that is a split that you should be looking at. Apart from that, in quantitative, arithmetic and modern math form a major chunk, and therefore those should be the topics that you are ideally targeting. In general English, on the other hand, it is grammar and vocabulary. Two things which you've done for the longest period in your life, and two things which you can master in the next 2 months. Now, coming to GK. GK is something which requires regular practice. For general awareness, all you can do is read static GK from the website, read static GK from the online journals, but at the same time, make sure that you're reading your newspapers regularly, because that is what is going to form your dynamic GK. That is what is going to form your current affairs. And therefore, to be able to excel at SET, to be able to crack the Symbiosis entrance test, to get into a Symbiosis college, what is important is not only the content, not only your speed, but it is the balance of both. And therefore, you should be accurate, at the same time you should be fast. And therefore, going by past analysis and what we are expecting this year, a good score for you to manage to clear the SET, considering it has a 70% weightage as well, is anywhere around 42 to 45. The more, the merrier. The plan that I've told you, the strategy that we discussed for around English having around 12 questions, quantitative having around 13 questions, your general awareness having around 9, and your logical reasoning having around 9, takes you beyond the 45-48 mark. And therefore, we already have a plan in place. All you've got to do is practice for the same. And I feel that with this particular thing in mind, make sure that you have your 4 P's sorted, and that should be enough to eventually crack the SET. Thank you so much and all the best.